1. Each number is a different live stream. You're listening to us. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for joining the ESBC Podcast Network, where every podcast is a business meeting, and every business meeting has to have a purpose and an outcome. The purpose is to make us money, right? We're not like the hypocrite athletes and politicians with overgeneralities, and they say, "Oh, I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for the people. I'm doing it for the universe." No. You're doing it for self-interest, what we'll talk a lot about today, and you're doing it for the money. So this is a horse racing true crime. So we're using true crime and horse racing to share insight into business and finance and into the heart of man, right? With myself and Mike Pristanici. I call him Coach Mike because that's how I knew him. Time flies. We met in 2010. This is now 2021. And we've had a lot of success in business and in life. Mike Pristanici has successful children, successful businesses, successful marriage for probably a half century. And we're fortunate, lucky, and good to have him as we provide insight, right? So that's the purpose, to provide insight, provide you information you are not getting anywhere else from major media, the church you go to, wherever. You're not getting information that we're, since we own our own businesses and we fire and hire our own clients, that we can, we're fortunate, lucky, and good that we are, we have latitude to give you the truth as we see it, unfiltered, but we do not have a monopoly on the truth. So if we're wrong, let us know. We're very accessible. Our Twitter is currency. You can learn a lot of information, but I've gotten a lot of information. At the end of the day, this is a sports betting podcast, and we're going to give you insight into that. We're up at 500% ROI. Tesla 700. We're 500. So that means you listening to the podcast and using our actionable information, you have 5 times more money than what you started. Right. So that's the purpose. The outcome is that 500% ROI, tangible information. So you get insight. So you give a man a fish, you teach him for a day. You teach the man to fish. You feed him for a lifetime. So thank you so much for joining us. Accurate Business Coaching, ADA Compliance, Michael Pristanici.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I like what you said about earlier, the idea of insights, and I haven't been married quite that many, it'll be 40, but you're close. You do gain insights. You do gain insights by listening to people. I tell people, try to listen to learn and don't listen to argue.
Right.
Because you're not going to learn anything, and people aren't going to respond to you favorably. So I learned over the years, and I'm a talker, so I have to learn to stop talking. And I think you said earlier about the insights. One of the insights I think we can share with people is listen, watch, take notes. You may agree with most of what we say. You may disagree with something. You know what? Let us know. Tell us, hey, you guys are talking about this and blah, blah, blah. And I don't agree. I've got this idea. That's how you learn. You share ideas, you discuss them. You say, you know what? You've got a good point. Not you're
Right.
full of, you don't know what you're talking about. You're wrong. I don't like doing that. I don't think anybody, if they're honest, likes having a conversation with someone like that. Right?
No, not at all. And I've gotten a lot of information that I've been able to monetize from the audience, from the growing podcast audience, from the growing audience on YouTube.
Yeah.
And as things move forward. Now, this is going to be more of a series. Now, all the podcasts have kind of a series element to them. And it's really like the season in the sport. But this one will be a series as far as elements in criminology, elements in finance, elements in business, right? That will build on each other. And it'll give you insight into what's going on in industries, local government, right? Horse racing, and the sports betting industry as it evolves. And as it evolves, at each step, we have a process to monetize that. So this is tangible information to monetize both, right? Three-dimensionally. Monetize it now and also in the future. So in the last podcast, we went over Vince Gill, who's a horse owner. He just won a lawsuit for $400 million. And we're going to play a relevant part that we're going to build this podcast on. And of course, you can listen to all the podcasts, and the older podcasts are more valuable than the current ones because you're not worried about the game. You're learning the hows and the whys, right? And you're getting information you're not getting anywhere else, and you're getting information so you won't get taken advantage of. And all the people jumping on Periscope, if you have a question, let me know, and we'll sure to answer it. So here's Mike Gill setting the foundation on a few things.
In horse racing has been rampant.
Can you hear it, Coach Mike?
It blew up corruption. You could fight this. It's when corporate America, the casinos of the world, united with the corrupt, that showed them wire services and offshore gaming. The same $5,000 horse at Penn National where you couldn't bet 200.
Okay, so we're talking about the casinos joining with corporations and corruption with the FBI, local politicians, and local judges. All right, in the horse racing industry.
$100, and today you can't bet $200. What if they could bet 10,000 at 10-1? Do you think it might just tempt the corrupt who was doing it for crumbs before? That's what's going on. And you know what they're doing with this great wealth? They're buying your politicians and your judges and your courts. Now, I haven't disappeared. If you watch stateofcorruption.org, you see me.
Okay, so we're talking about syndicates, right? And the syndicates are buying judges, they're buying city councilmen, they're buying county boards, right? And these are people that are linked to horse racing regulation. Something I forgot to add in the beginning. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about regulation, laws, what's unethical, ethical, what has teeth, what doesn't have teeth, and then we'll talk about maximum security, and we're going to detail the life of Jason Servis. All right, we'll continue with Mike Gill.
Pulling them together. My attack on Penn National is because they are organized crime, and they have brought these officials. The mayor of Harrisburg, for 32 years, gets arrested.
Right.
They turn around and have
so we're talking about
AG, which I believe is honest. Catherine Kane just get kicked out.
Okay, so this is 2015 Mike Gill, right? We're talking about Penn National, Pennsylvania, right? So who was born in Pennsylvania, Coach Mike?
Benjamin Franklin?
Joe Biden.
Oh.
Right, which was contentious.
Joe Biden.
Right, so we have Penn National, who currently owns Barstool Sports.
Barstool Sports, right?
Right, and we know that they're connected with the Wynn and their known mafia syndicate connections.
It's true,
right?
that. True that, yes.
So let me ask you this, Coach Mike. Yes or no question real quick, and then we'll go back to Mike Gill.
Okay.
These judges that are bought, right? The city councilmen that are bought, county board that are bought, right?
Yeah.
Are they the same people who certified the election in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
And they're connected with known mob people, right? So that's why it gets contentious.
One thing, Josh, I'll share with you one thing that happened to me today, talking about the legal system and attorneys.
Right.
In the ADA world, I have an attorney that's referred me business for years. I don't think she's ever, and I mean this sincerely, ever been on a job site ever in her life.
Right.
I said to her today, it might just be good if you were to join us and the client on his site just to show you what happens in ADA remediation. You know what she said? She said, I'm swamped, but I would love to do that. So the whole thing true here with our audience and people that are listening, if you have an opportunity to stretch yourself and maybe do something you've never done before, let me encourage you to do it. You will learn. You will learn way more. You can look at pictures of drawings till the cows come home. When you walk a job site, I'll tell you, you learn so much, Josh. It's amazing. It's almost like you're taking the book and it becomes real.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You learn by doing. You learn by doing. So let's get back to Mike Gill, and now we established the Penn National that owns Barstool Sports. It's connected with mafia connections, and the mafia or syndicate or just unethical people involved with the horse racing industry pay off city councilmen, city boards, judges, and the FBI, like Black Mass, that movie, right? So all these people, Peter Strzok or FISA warrants, all these people are paid off. So it in a way too, going through the podcast and going to the details of the podcast, you understand the news on a deeper level on both sides of what is going on and why bias kind of permeates in what Judge Kavanaugh says. You're supposed to be calling balls and strikes, but you really can't get away from bias, right? We'll continue on.
Now, you know why? She leaked about the corruption. This thing's about to fall apart. The FBI's covering this up. They know. Listen, I haven't been wrong yet. One time. Now tell me if you still think I'm crazy, because I'm telling you now, there's been arrests last night that you haven't even heard yet. The compromise is they don't want to get into the politicians. They don't want to get into Penn National. Penn National is 93% of it is owned by the casinos. Wynn Casino, who bought land in Boston to build a casino, you know what the holdup was? Because I caught wires from Penn National to the Costa Nostra of New England. Not my words, the Boston Globe. They were purchasing it from Wynn. Wynn, who owns 30% of Penn National. See? There's mob connections here. Do you want them controlling your judges and courts? That's what's at stake here. It's horse racing in the life and death of it. But it goes into your courts. It goes into these law firms and the insurers. We just got turned out, inside out, by the business world. Why do you think you've seen all this corruption? And no one goes to jail. And who's grown out of our 8 years of recession? The casino world.
All right, so he made a point, right?
Sure.
When we're growing up, right, we're told if you do something against the law, you're going to arrest you and you're going to go to jail, right? And that's half the story. What it is that, and let me know your thoughts, what you think about this. So I'll go point by point. Number one is that it's my contention in my wife, Anna, we've been married 17 years, and we disagree about 50% of the time. So Coach Mike, feel free to disagree, right? Because that's how you learn. You learn from people who think the opposite of you, right? So it's just like
only 50%.
Yeah, 50%. The other 50% we laugh about, right? Because we're commiserating. But it's like Easter Bunny and Santa Claus.
Right.
That if you do something wrong, that you automatically go to jail, and that a cop is just calling balls and strikes. Okay.
Right.
So that's a myth, and we get into something very important right now, something extremely important that they're not teaching on the news, or not teaching in school, because it's hard, but it's real. They need to start teaching it in school, and parents need to start teaching it in school. And it's selective prosecution. So when you understand selective prosecution, right, a lot more things are going to make sense everywhere. right? So it's not whether you commit a crime or not. It is there political will, right, to arrest you for that crime? And everything's a racket. So is it part of the racket to arrest you for the crime? Now, murderers and rapists and people like that, those are automatic. But everything else depends on where you are and what the political climate is, not whether it's right or wrong or moral, or whether it's illegal or legal. What are your thoughts, Coach Mike?
Well, there's a lot to be said for that whole soliloquy you just did, Macbeth. Yes, as a kid growing up, I was told, don't lie. Okay. I was told, don't lie. Mom and dad, don't lie.
Right.
And you didn't question it. You just said, okay, don't lie, because the consequences were dire. They were.
Right.
And the same thing with law. If you're speeding, you're going to get pulled over for a ticket. You can argue till the cows come home, you're guilty. All right. And a hard lesson to learn is you have to learn to accept the responsibility of your consequences. So if I do stupid things and I get caught, I may end up going to jail. I may end up getting in trouble. There's a lot of things that can happen because of that. So you start learning at a very young age, maybe I ought to keep my nose clean, to use an old phrase, behave myself, stay out of trouble, and don't hang out with people that are going to get you in trouble, which unfortunately I did a lot. And when you go to jail and you learn things, you say, I don't want to do that again, and you don't. Now, the idea about selective prosecution, sure, or persecution, if you will. Yes, it happens all the time. Is there racism? Is there bias? Everybody in the world is racist and biased, whether they like it or not. If you say you're on one side of the political spectrum and you're not racist, you're not telling the truth, right? So the whole idea is our perception becomes our reality. And I had to learn this growing up, and I had to learn this in business. Sometimes I perceive things to be a certain way, right? And all of a sudden, Josh, I meet you and we start talking, and you begin to change. You begin to change my perception. Why? Because you bring a different perspective, a different look, a different view. Well, if I have 15 or 20 or 30 people in my life bringing me different perspectives and different views, guess what? I'm probably going to change. I'm going to evolve, or I'm going to grow, or I'm mature. So I think part of what you said earlier is true. We need to help people understand you can change. You really can, but it's hard work. It's a discipline.
Right. And to know what's legal or illegal, you're going to have to do research in the town you're in, and in the political climate you're in, and corporate climate you're in, to find out. It doesn't mean you're going to do it or not, but one of the basic items in life is know your surroundings. One of the basic survival skills in life is know your surroundings. Right. And you got to know the budget of the local town you're in, so you know what is going on. Now, the law and justice are distant cousins at best. So we're picking on the horse racing industry, but it's the same for the finance industry and probably any other industry, that there's collusion between the judges, between the people on the county boards, people on the city boards, right? And the FBI. Don't assume that the FBI is on the up and up. They're going to prosecute what's in their best interest to prosecute, not literally what's legal or illegal, right? And we notice it with the mask, right? In Orange County, they don't enforce the mask. LA County, they have to enforce the mask. And it's selective prosecution. So the sheriff is prosecuting what he wants to prosecute, not necessarily what's illegal, right? And what's legal. So from there, we're going to go to ethics, right? I know that in my town, Lake Forest, there's an ethics policy, and they mention it, but it doesn't have teeth. So what that means is that the city council can violate all the ethic policies they want without an enforcement mechanism. And the only way, okay, you can modify behavior is by having an enforcement mechanism,
Mhm.
especially if there's money involved. It's just common sense. But as we know, common sense is not so common.
Okay.
That's why you can't assume anything anywhere. You got to do your own research, and don't just assume that this is an ethical, that this guy works at this company and he's going to pass a bid through the city, so on and so forth. Do not make the assumption that ethical processes and that common sense is going to be followed. What are your thoughts on that? Because you've gone through that road many, many times.
Yes.
You got cheated out of bids for construction, and then you got ADA compliance. And we'll go through ADA compliance to make the point that I'm making about the reality of life. And this is a great podcast, especially for the people starting in business, to kind of get, there's a big difference, right, between reality and what you're taught in school, what you're taught at the corporation, right? Big difference between what we hope for and what reality is.
You mean the theory of business versus real business?
Exactly. Selective prosecution and violation of ethical policies.
Theory of a business. And I asked the guy one time, well, the theory of business sounds good. Did your professor ever have a business? You ever own a business? Well, no, he's in academia. I said, so literally he wrote a book on the theory of business based on what? Theories? Based on reading? I said, well, isn't that rather foolish? Are you calling Dr. So-and-so foolish? I'm calling the whole stinking system foolish. Yes. What's the matter? Wake up and smell the Java. The theory of business is just like my attorney. She's never been to a job site, Josh. And once you step on a job site and you step into some, we call it mud, cement, or you step on some rebar, you realize I shouldn't do that, should I? No. Do you have any boots on? Well, no, I have high heels. You shouldn't wear high heels in a job site. And so this idea of when you submit a bid to a group, a company, first thing I ask people is, do you know anybody on your city council? Have you ever met them? Ever talked to them? And 95% of people say no. I said, so you don't know anything about them? You never met them, never had coffee with them, never went to their office. You don't know a thing about them. And you just assume because you read something in the paper or saw it on TV, it's the truth. Do you make decisions in life that way? I hope not. I pray not, because you've been making a lot of bad decisions. So
right. And getting to the point is, if an ethical policy, right, at a board or whatever, does not have an enforcement mechanism, what value does it have, Coach Mike, in your experience in business?
It has zero. I mean, it's lip service. A guy says to me, I'll get back to you tomorrow. 3 days later, I haven't heard from him. Now, back in the day, I used to chase people. My words, not yours. I would chase people and say, hey, Josh, you're supposed to get back to me. Oh, yeah, we went a different direction, Mike. Oh, were you going to tell me? No, they had no intention of telling you. Why? They got a better deal or they got a better offer, whatever it was. So, yeah, absolutely.
Right. And what about this statement that 80% of lawyers don't know what they're doing?
From your mouth to God's ear.
Right. No, I've been several lawyers. I've been all the lawyers that I've gone through. I've defended myself or done my own lawsuit. Right now, you look at ADA compliance. Right. It's unethical. We all know that it's unethical to have a ramp where somebody who has a disability falls and gets hurt. Right. It's unethical. But can someone have criminal charges for violating ADA compliance rules?
Well, first of all, let's describe what ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. People used to call it handicapped. Now it's disabled. And basically in California, what you're talking about is if your business is open to the public, called public accommodation, you are supposed to have all of the ramps, all of the parking stalls, all of the signage, everything according to what they call ADA and CBC, California Building Code regulations. Can you be sued if you're not in compliance? Yes. Initially, it's in, usually a court that says, hey, we're going to sue you for $30,000 of your restaurant, Josh. And
Right.
you, $30,000 my restaurant for what? You don't have a tow-away sign. You don't have parking stall. You don't have accessible aisle. You don't have these yellow bumps, truncated domes. You don't have signage. We're going to sue you. And
Right.
you're blindsided. You're literally blindsided. Like, oh, I never even knew I had to do that. Again, back to your point earlier. Have you done your due diligence? Did you ask the right questions? Did you dig deep enough? More than likely, no. You just assumed, nasty word, right? You
Right.
just assumed you're good. And now these serial or predatory litigants are chasing people,
Is
almost
a
like chasers,
right.
to sue you because your bathroom mirrors above 40 inches finished floor. You say, that's ridiculous, Mike. I said, of course it's ridiculous, but it is technically the law. And technically they can sue you because you're breaking the law and they can get rewarded for that.
And what's the enforcement mechanism, right? The owner, right, has to pay money out, and then on their business credit, they have to pay more money for business loans and business insurance because they have a judgment. That would be worst case. So to avoid that, what people do is they settle.
They settle.
So that isn't on their business record.
Right.
They don't have to pay
A lot of court.
more money for loans because 90% of court cases are settled versus going to court.
Trial by
So
jury.
in horse racing, up until Jason Servis, in this indictment, the case started, or the investigation by the FBI people. They could be paid off or not paid off. Seems like they were, because this investigation lasted close to 8 years before they started giving enforcement mechanisms, right? So enforcement mechanisms were important because that's where you get cuffed up. That's where you get put in jails. That's when you get to put fines. And in the words of Dwight Robinson, city councilman of Lake Forest, he told me, white collar, this is a Christian guy. Well, he's not Christian, but he's a professed Christian guy, Sunday school teacher. And he says, my dad's been a minister for 50 years. He says, white collar crime pays because there's so many crimes being committed that law enforcement can't prosecute every crime.
And people voted for this person to represent them in that city.
Right. Because people don't pay attention, right? They're not paying attention at all. They just see him going to the church. They get a flyer. I remember working the polls. 40% of the people, I worked the polls 5 times, and I took notes, would take the little pamphlet and actually decide who are they going to vote right inside that box, right? And I understand it, right? People are in. You can look for podcasts where I talk about the amygdala brain. That's a part of the brain that's in the panic portion of the brain. Most people are in that part of their brain, where that part of the brain you can't think rationally. So they're not sitting there researching local politicians. You really should, because that affects you, right? So in this part of it, right, linking it all together, right, self-interest. The city manager in Lake Forest, she makes $350,000 a year, and when the pandemic hit, right, and all the money comes out of the coffers, instead of taking $100,000 less of her salary, what did she do? She gets rid of the department and fires a guy who has 3 kids and 5 years away from retirement and paying 3 kids for college. She'd rather keep her $400 a year salary than to help that guy out. Now, what happens to the community? She, instead of taking money from her salary, she's doing 2 things, right? She's, number one, childcare. That was $60 a month. After school care is now $600. Stressing middle class, poor families already squeezed by the pandemic, because she wants to keep her $400,000 a year salary. And she's cutting the $89,000 for school crossing guards. Instead of cutting, you and I known you for 10 years. You know me. If you and I are making $400,000, we're betting on these games, so we got $1 million.
Right.
we would gladly take the 89,000 or network with our rich friends, $89,000 for school guards, because school guards are the defense from who? Pedophiles who are preying on these kids, and God knows what else, right? But she wants to keep her 400,000 rather than, now that's unethical, but it's not illegal, and there's no enforcement mechanisms for her. And people need to get hammered that distinction.
And Shakespeare said, there's the rub. It's not illegal, but it's immoral. Okay. And
unethical.
It's unethical. It really is. And you say, and people say, well, are you guys judging her? Yes, absolutely. We're judging her based on moral standards, based on common sense, based on decency.
Would you do business with her?
I probably would not.
No, not at all. I don't want her money.
I don't.
And there's a beauty of owning your own business, where you could say, hey, I don't care how much money you have, I don't want your money, because you can live off 220,000.
Well, that happened to me the other day in a situation with, again, another attorney and a client who expected something to be done for some ridiculously low price. And I said, I can't do that. I said, I have professional people, I have architects, I have inspectors, I have a certain pricing I have to charge. And they were rather upset and irate and said, well, we're going to go someplace else. I said, well, thank you for the opportunity. Goodbye. In other words, don't chase them, let them go. There's an old expression, you got to be careful what you pay for, because you get what you pay for. Right? You get what you pay for. And someone says, well, it's free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, honey. I'm sorry. Never has been, never will be. Right?
Right. And then something we'll get into with horse racing is racing regulations. What are regulations? Regulations, you can, depending on where you're at, you can violate a regulation, go to jail, or nothing happens. So who's regulating the sports industry or the horse racing industry, Coach Mike?
Yeah, well, it's according to the states, like, for example, the state of New York, supposedly they have state and they have federal guidelines for how to run horse racing, horse tracks, the whole, gambling, gaming, all that stuff. Again, when you get that illegal or that illicit element in there, and a judge is owned by some guy who owns, let's just take the word Wynn, W-Y-N-N, and some guy who owns part of Penn National, and all of a sudden the entire system is corrupt.
Right.
The enforcement mechanism is what? Where is it? Who? And that's why a lot of attorneys love filing lawsuits, because what are they doing? They're buying time. They're buying time cheaply. Oh, we're going to take that to court, Josh, but we have to continue that until July. Why? It's January. Well, because the calendar is busy, the docket's full. That full? Yes. I just got stabbed.
Right. So most of the judges, they're in that culture, they're in that racket. So that's why, even though I think probably Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley should be thrown out of the Senate, but they could explain things a little bit better and say, hey, all these judges are part of a group, and they're not going to defy the guy that's certifying the election, because they're part of the gang, right? They're kind of like a clique in high school, right? So it doesn't matter if you lose the case 100 times, you still might be right. We don't know.
Yeah.
And you still have to have time to bring up the evidence, right? So again, right? So this is the key. Unless a regulation or ethical policy has, right, to recap this part before we go into Jason's service, unless an ethical policy, if a regulation, whatever it is, if it doesn't have enforcement mechanisms, it's worthless. Mm-hmm. The other part of it is, even if you do commit a crime, the people who are paid for law enforcement to enforce that crime, if they don't feel like doing it, right, or it's not politically expedient for them to do it, they're not going to do it. And people are going to get away with it. Or some people might get away with it because they have the money. The thing with the pardon, we can go both sides. The most egregious pardon, right? Trump has done some, right? But it was Seth Rich by Bill Clinton, right? And we're apolitical, so we'll call out both sides for the corruption that is on both sides. Seth Rich with Clinton, right? A rich guy who killed someone, got away with it because he had a lot of money. Pure and simple, right? Same thing for like Manafort, all those guys who cheated on taxes and this and that, sent information to Ukrainian oligarchs. We did have a great podcast on the Ukraine with a businesswoman from the Ukraine. Encourage everybody to listen to it because it's very analogous and connects what happened with the Capitol, because it can happen here. And she talked about the feeling of being invaded by a foreign force to take away her country. And here it's done in many different ways. It's done by either cancel culture, black separatists, white neo-Nazis. It comes from all different forces. And the breakdown, what I'm talking about here specifically, right, Coach Mike, when you listen, is the breakdown of rule of law, right? Exactly. Rule of law. So when you have that broken down, you get into Wild Wild West, which basically is what happened to the horse racing industry.
Yep.
Or it's happening to the horse races. So as we go through Jason Servis and True Crime, it's really a snapshot of what's going on in the horse races. Your thoughts, Coach Mike?
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about that rule of law, and I don't know where people stand religiously or whatever, but years and years ago, the 10 Commandments from the Bible used to be pretty much God's law for man, right? And then from God's law for man to, they made it a movie. So the 10 Commandments went from God's law for man to a movie. And now today, a comment like, you believe that biblical stuff? You actually read the Bible, believe that? I mean, that's how far we've gone, to your point about what is the enforcement mechanism. Years ago in America, I believe.
But it's like Dwight Robinson, he's a Sunday school teacher and Christian guy. So people that aren't most Christian are the guys you have to worry about. So everybody's just in self-interest. It's like anything goes, right? Yeah. And in that environment, Jason Servis gets arrested. And you're 69 years old, right?
Mm-hmm. In March.
Right. And Jason Servis is 63.
Right.
What do you think is going through his mind? Jason Servis, horse racing industry, 63 years old. He's a successful horse trainer, and I'll get into detail after Coach Mike's answer. Sure. But he's sitting in jail now in the middle of a pandemic. How does that feel?
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be thinking to himself, I had a chance years ago to either say no or go a different direction, but all of a sudden they flashed $500,000 in front of me, and I never saw $500,000 ever, and said, what do I have to do? And they said, well, basically you just kind of turn your head. We're going to do these PEDs, performance enhancing drugs, and they're going to be pretty much unlabeled. You're going to be working with veterinarians, and all of a sudden it's going to be one slick, smooth operation. Nobody's going to know a thing. And brought in hook, line, and sinker. Well, guess what? Somebody somewhere in that whole beautiful scheme of things told the police or told the feds, and they said, what's going on again? And they told them they were a stool pigeon. They squealed. And they told the whole story and started naming names and cities and places. Now you got a guy 63 years old who is on top of the world, quote unquote, sitting in jail thinking, yeah, I made a mistake. I should have said no. That's a courage.
It's the enforcement mechanism, right? People don't change unless they have to change, unless they get caught. And most people commit crimes because they like to, right?
Yeah.
And we'll get into the way law enforcement works, where it seems like in this case, Jason Servis was arrested so he can give information and squeal on a Peter Navarro. And we'll on the next podcast, what we'll do is we'll profile Peter Navarro and talk about all the elements in the horse racing industry, right? Unless we have Jim Desmond from from the county, San Diego County Board of Supervisors with some timely information. Says San Diego is the 10th biggest, largest county city in the country. So we'll get some real insight on ethics, on regulations from somebody who's getting paid in the six figures, right, to adjudicate this. We'll get to know him really well. The audience will get really educated. So Jason Servis was born April 2nd, 1957. He was a successful trainer, and then he trained Maximum Security, who finished first in the Kentucky Derby in 2019. He's the brother, his brother is John Servis, who is the trainer of Smarty Jones, who also was a big racist, right? So he started from the bottom all the way up. His biggest year, this all these links, I'll have them in the episode notes, and I'll have website information, Coach Mike's business website information. His best year, so we see the numbers that we're talking about, was at close to the end of his career, right? As we figure it's going to be over 2018, right? He has 5.7 million in purse earnings and 112 wins, right? He ran second in the 2013 Breeders' Cup.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll look up his statistics here in a second here. His biography. So he's a successful trader. Now, 2 years where most people retire or a set retirement age, he's sitting in jail.
Yeah.
So again, to set the stage, right? You have criminal, you have civil, right? People pay civil penalties for ADA compliance. Most people settle. They don't go to court and have a jury because they don't want to pay extra for loans and extra for insurance, right? And then you have the horse racing regulations and industry that, as we saw through Mike Gill, it's regulated and run by judges, people in county boards, city council, and crooked FBI agents, right? Crooked FBI agents who cover for the racket of horse racing, right? Horse racing, true crime. And as we go along in the series, we'll detail dynasties that own racetracks, that own horses, because when a horse increases in value, you buy it and you deduct it from your tax liability. All right. So wait here as the internet's kind of slowing up on me. We'll look at some of the numbers for Jason Servis. And then we'll talk about how he got in trouble. And it's interesting, right? That he got in trouble with one of the pet peeves, and one of the things that I think is doing the most harm to California and is doing the most harm to the country is, and I think a lot of it needs to change, is that foreign entities and foreign individuals have the right to purchase real estate and property in the United States, right? And the difference between a communist country, a socialist country, and a capitalist country is the ability to buy and sell real estate. All right.
That's true.
Right. So Jason Servis was born in Charlestown, West Virginia, trainer of thoroughbred horses. And he didn't start having the best years of his career until he met Mr. Navarro. Right? And how, based on, you read the indictment, how Vid, this guy from Charlestown, Appalachia. Now, Appalachia is very important these days because those are Trump voters. People want to understand Trump voters. Why did you think, in your opinion, after he had a career where he went from the bottom all the way to the top, best year 2018, why did he have his best year in 2018?
Well, first of all, you made the point, and I think it should be made again. His avocation, his vocation was he was a horse trainer. He loved horses. And so he knew horses, and he knew how to treat horses. He knew how to breed them, how to run them, train them. He was a very good horse trainer. And I think by the time he got to 2017, 2018, he had a reputation for building a good horse, building a good brand. And what happened was somebody, Peter Navarro, one of his associates, said, "Hey, we got this guy, Jason Servis. He's a West Virginia boy. Now he's down in Jupiter, Florida, but he's got a home here in, I think it's up in Eatontown. We should talk to him." So a veterinarian and another guy go and talk to him. They share their story, how they're doing, what they're doing. And he probably initially was innocent, thinking, this sounds pretty good. Yeah, it sounds like you've got a good program to help the horses, right? All of a sudden he gets involved and he realizes, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought. This wasn't my perception. I was duped, not doped, but duped. And I think he got duped, Josh. And I think he got duped, but he said, yeah, but look at the money, look at the fame, look at the power, whatever that drug is, right? Power, that drug. And it overwhelmed him. It overtook him. And he got caught up in a huge, huge net that he couldn't get out of.
Now, the investigation started in 2013. Okay.
Right.
And they had all this information on them, right? And we'll talk about it a little bit more next week, the whole distribution network.
Right.
So he takes a horse maximum security that was worth $13 million. Well, it was only worth like $12,000. And then something happened in between that. And what happened? The horses got spiked.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously he knew about it. But 7 years into this investigation, nothing happened until they took the horse to the Saudi Cup. And the Saudis said, hey, we're not going to pay this horse because the toxicology on this horse, right?
Yeah. He was
is off.
Yeah, it was $20 million purse they withheld.
Right. So, again, you got to know your surroundings. They were getting away with all this corruption and all these things. And then suddenly they get in trouble after the Saudi Cup, right? Why, in your opinion, did it take the Saudi Cup for these guys to get in trouble for spiking horses?
What you said earlier is a key point, that foreign individuals, foreign companies, foreign entities can purchase land in America. Right. And if you know, the Saudis and the Japanese and Chinese and others have bought a lot of land, a lot of golf courses, the horse tracks and others in this country. So there's a lot of information that flows back and forth, okay?
Right.
And the Saudi people are known for their horses. I mean, Arabian horses are notoriously good, right? So when their horse got beat, their horses got beat.
Right.
Said, wait, something's not adding up here. Something's wrong. And somebody said, we better talk to the king or whomever. Hey, before we pay out any of this money to this group, why don't we just check these horses?
Right.
So somebody knew something somewhere along the line, and somebody said something to somebody. You know how that goes. Somebody, next thing you know, boom, it's front page news. And I think that's the genesis of it, to be honest. What did you take on that?
Exactly. The FBI agents doing the case and all this and that are getting paid off. And now they can say, hey, I'm going to have to do this, right? Because now heat's coming on me. Jared Kushner is friends with the Saudis. This is the first Saudi Cup race. They want to get involved in this industry. And they tested the horses. They're not stupid, right? They tested the horses and they saw the explosiveness of this horse,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
they're not going to pay it out. So now that's why the whole setup is for the big reveal is now, right? Then we got to learn. You got to know your surroundings.
Your surroundings, right?
Once they got on the plane and went to Saudi Arabia, right? Everything changed.
Everything
And the
changed.
selective prosecution, which I keep telling you about, because you got to look at it in your life, because you could be comfortable, you could be in a company and you've been doing things the whole way, right? And you talked about the beginning about change. I'll put a link to it to John Norcross, which fortunately, lucky, good. I took a seminar from him. George, he got the dissertation and he's a doctor. He makes a lot of money, John Norcross, and he came up with the stages of change. You have to go through each stage to truly change, and change is gradual. Again, on my NFL podcast last month, listen to the last two podcasts I did on the Hawthorne effect, on perception, right?
Yeah.
How you have to check your perception. And
Yes.
you can go to 500 Days of Summer, the series, the Undoing, 500 Days of Summer, The Undoing. He's Just Not That Into You, which is a Sex and the City episode that also turned into a book and into a movie. The Affairs, another great show that really illustrates the different parts of the perception. And Coach Mike and I, Mike Personage, are fortunate, lucky, and good that we've been married so long that we have spouses that check our perception, right? And we're different than the guy who's been living alone for 30 years. And you go talk to him and listen to him, see all the crazy stuff he says, versus Coach Mike and I, who've been checked by clients. I've been checked by people who listen to the podcast. You have to have an open mind, and you don't know anything. The more you know, the least you know. And you could always learn every day from anyone. It could be a little kid giving you perception, all right? Giving you information that you need to process, that you might not have processed, all right? So if Jason Servis comes to Coach Mike and I, right, and says, want to take the horse to Saudi Arabia, I'm going to say, selective prosecution. This whole thing that you've gotten away with for years here, you might not get away with it in Saudi Arabia. And this FBI guy that you've paid off, once this goes international, and again, listen to, it's funny because it was the first hearing in the Senate, right? It was for a reason. It was the liaison between the FBI and the CIA, because once it goes international, you get CIA agents versus FBI agents. And CIA agents are more paid off. These people are millionaires, and they're doing it because they love to do it. And the lady who got on National Security Council, the liaison between the FBI and the CIA, she can put a car and a plane together with her hands. Believe me. What you see on Homeland is half what she's done. And she's created different forms of torture that was used in Guantanamo to get information from terrorists. I would not mess with her. So you go from paid off FBI guy, right, with regulations, and paid off to CIA and enforcement mechanisms. And they triggered this, and that's how he is in jail right now, Jason Servis, because he did not understand selective prosecution.
Any of our listeners or viewers that know Jason Bourne, the Bourne Identity, right?
Right.
I mean, as you're explaining that, I'm thinking about that movie, all the things going on, and it's an international situation. And the phrase that came to me, if Jason Servis would have come to me or to you, I'd have said, "Hey, Coach, all bets are off. You're going to Saudi Arabia. Okay, first of all, you're going overseas and you're going into a whole different country, a whole different world. And number two, do you know anybody there? Do you know anything about any of the surroundings? You know a racetrack, a horse track. That's about it, right? So when you talked about knowing your surroundings, Josh, what you know the racetrack, That's not the surroundings. That's the place where the event happens. But that's not your surroundings. Your surrounding is you're in a whole different world, different country, different language, different customs. All bets are off, Coach. And I just think that I think it was motivated by greed and by ego. And when you get greed and ego in front, you're looking for trouble.
Now, what is the most expensive advice, Coach Mike?
It's a wide open question, Josh. Thank you.
The most expensive advice is bad advice. So you got bad advice.
You got very bad advice.
Do not go to Saudi Arabia because things are going to change. Here's different states. Different states have different laws. And here, it could be county to county, city to city, right? In San Diego County, from what I'm hearing, Orange County, you can go around and not wear a mask, not worry about it at all. You go to LA or you go to Seattle, it's going to be a totally different story. Yeah. And huge part of selective prosecution is exactly that. And the man at 63 years old is sitting in jail because he hasn't been like us and understand what selective prosecution is. And that, of course, I don't have to say it, but common sense isn't so common, so you never know, right? You're being lied to by everybody. I don't care if it's your preacher. I don't care if any preacher could be a great guy and he's lying or giving you bad information, not on purpose, but you're getting bad information from your preacher. You're getting bad information from your sheriff. Because what is your sheriff's going to say? I'm a law and order guy. No. You're a selective prosecution guy that's going to do something that's in your best interest, in the best interest of the people who are paying you. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is selective prosecution, and really understanding that can give you more clarity, right, on why cops aren't being prosecuted after shooting Black people in the back while they're running. It's selective prosecution, right? Why all the people that rushed in the Capitol might have killed someone. Some are being arrested and charged. Some are not. It is selective prosecution. And for a lot of times it's been, someone or whatever, right? So it's always better to be lucky than good. And we talk a lot about probability theory.
Yeah.
So before we go to the last words with Coach Mike on the next podcast, we're going to talk about horse racing deaths and how they figure into horse racing selective prosecution, right? Remember, the law and justice are distant cousins at best. We're going to go through each section of the horse racing industry. In a lot of the podcast moving forward, we'll talk about dynasties, tax mitigation, and business and finance, how it links into it. Because a horse is a tax deduction. Super rich, right?
Right.
And then you have capital gains tax when a horse, its value goes higher. And people buy expensive paintings and horses for the most part to mitigate their taxes, because most people want to keep money in their pocket and not pay it to the government for selective prosecution. Right. And then we'll talk about each section of the horse racing industry. And we'll talk about George Navarro. And we'll detail him, because the interesting thing about George Navarro, they kind of caught my interest. And I said, man, I'm going to have to finish up and make sure we do horse racing true crime, is that he wants to be transferred to Ocala, Florida. Nobody ever wants to be transferred to Ocala, Florida. But that's where the big Bad Boys Farm is, that has a lot of horses trained by George Navarro and Servis and on. And they're run by the Gambino family of John Gotti fame.
Oh,
John Jr.'s there, and they're combined with the five families. And we'll get, because really the five families are a team than the mafia and the syndicates run by major corporations now. And they're faster to pull the trigger and kill you in many different ways, or pay somebody to arrest you and ruin your whole life, or political bosses, the people that certified elections.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Josh,
Right?
let me share with our
And
audience.
give you last words, and then we'll close.
Okay, let me share a couple. I'm going to give you 5 letters that people need to remember. WIIFM. What's in it for me? Okay. And if you can figure out what the WIFM is, what we call it the WIFM, WIFM. If I can figure out what the WIFM is for you, I'm way down the road. So let's say I'm dealing with Josh, and Josh says, I'm a business guy. I want to help you protect your assets, Coach Mike. And here's a plan I have, and here's a tax mitigation strategy. What do you think? Immediately, I'm impressed with the fact that you're thinking about serving me. Okay. Yes, you're going to be paid for your services, of course, but you're thinking about ways to help me preserve my estate, serve my money, preserve my assets, if you will. Okay. So, with them, what's in it for me? That's a big one. The other one is, and I would have shared this with Jason Servis years ago. Who is your mentor or mentors? Who do you have in your life that is speaking into your life that you're listening to, as opposed to disagreeing with all the time? Remember, I said earlier, listen to learn, don't listen to argue. I think if I've learned one thing in the last 69 years on planet Earth, I'm learning to listen to learn, not to argue. I may disagree with you. I may disagree with you violently and vehemently, but I don't think by me saying, "Oh, Josh, you're an idiot. That's crazy." I don't think that's the best discourse to approach. I think a better approach is, Josh, that's an interesting perspective. Can I ask you a question? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Now, Mr. Hand questions, right? Who, what, when, where, why, how much, how many? When you have that kind of, and I don't think a lot of people in horse racing do that. They're dictating. They're not listening. They're not having conversations. They're having, these one-offs. So my suggestion for our audience, viewing and listening audience, is listen longer. Just as a guy, because most guys can't listen, don't listen, won't listen. You have a wife, she'll tell you that. Listen longer. And instead of giving your opinion on everything under the sun, maybe hold your own confidence a little bit longer. Maybe don't share everything you know about something, because you may not know that much about it. So that's my 2 cents.
Right. No, and to tie up Jason's service, and we'll get to detail what we're going to go into in the next podcast, right? The purpose and the outcome is that you get information you're not getting anywhere else, and you're getting insight that you're not getting anywhere else. And one big one is delayed gratification, right? Salesmen think short term, businessmen think long. You've had a long career,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
You're a measure of the 5 people around you. And he needed to measure uh, George Navarro. He needed to know
Yeah.
selective prosecution and measure George Navarro, or else he would not be sitting in jail. Now, most of the time, it's not as dramatic as sitting in jail. It's losing money, losing emotion, maybe losing a relationship, losing the worst part of what people don't get is losing time. You might not even been prosecuted on it, but time is a scarce resource you're never getting back, and you're always got to be learning and evolving and say, hey, I'm out. I'm going to look for some other people, some other things. So I went from born in Appalachia, West Virginia, out of nothing, and now I'm doing well for myself, and now I'm sitting in jail cell in the middle of pandemic, COVID-19,
Right.
where COVID-19 doesn't even have a window to get out of.
Mm.
And it's just such a wide conspiracy, and they spent so much time on it, and now it has all kinds of eyes on it. And the Saudis are involved, and the Saudis control what? Our oil.
Real.
And they've kept the stock market going up and up and up in the middle of the pandemic. So he doesn't even get out. There's murderers who've gotten out because of COVID-19 and because of the jails being such a hot spot. Jason Servis is still in jail, right?
Mm.
Because he didn't understand what we've taught on this podcast about selective prosecution. And the salesmen think short term, businessmen think long term, and we always end with a long term thinker, guy who got us through World War II, Sir Winston Churchill. You make a living from your labor, but you make a life from what you give.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the ESBC Sports Betting Financial Podcast. This is the Horse Racing True Crime. And I'm going to prepare it tonight. Then tomorrow morning, I'll give you the winners so you make money on the NFC and the AFC championship games. Thank you for listening, and stay safe out there.